Hello, my name is Parides Tortini, and I am an FWO Research Fellow at Ghent University in Belgium. I specialize in the modern and contemporary history of Japanese Buddhism, with a particular focus on the analysis of the transnational networks and flows of ideas that informed the construction of modern Buddhism. In this video lecture, I will discuss the role of Buddhism in keeping memory of the experience of migration of the Karayuki-san, Japanese women involved in sex trade networks between Japan and Southeast Asia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I will do it through the analysis of a collection of photos of Karayuki-san preserved at the Buddhist temple in Shimabara, Nagasaki Prefecture. I will connect this important visual source with the material source of the memorial pagoda built at the same temple through the donations of the Karayuki-san. In this photo, we see a group of women wearing kimonos, their hair arranged in traditional Japanese style, some kneeling, some standing, all of them with their hands joined in prayer and bowing reverentially toward the center of the scene where the object of their worship is placed. This is a vertical scroll with a representation of a Buddhist scene dedicated to the spirits of the dead that they were commemorating with the help of a Buddhist priest officiating the ritual next to the scroll. While we could expect this scene to take place in a Japanese cemetery or in a Buddhist temple, the natural scenery behind the women is characterized by palm trees and other subtropical vegetation. The note added to the photo clarifies that the location is in the Dutch Indies, today's Indonesia. Who were these women, and what was their connection to the Buddhist priest? The women in this photo are Karayuki-san. A term generally indicates those Japanese women, mostly from the areas of Shimabara and Amakusa in Kyushu, who migrated overseas since the early Meiji period in the 1870s, many of whom to become sex workers in the brothels of Southeast Asia. The term Kara in the name originally indicated China, the land beyond the sea from Kyushu, but came to increasingly identify the harbors of Southeast Asia connected to Japan through trade, especially for the exportation of coal from the mines of Kyushu. The term Karayuki-san became also the basis for Ameyuki-san, the Japanese migrant sex workers to North America discussed in another section of this website. Most of these women came from very poor backgrounds, were illiterate, and were often tricked into accepting to migrate without knowing they would be employed as sex workers. It took them years to pay back to their brothel managers the debt that they had accumulated for their travel from Japan and for their accommodation and living expenses, hence the slavery-like characterization of their labor by many historians. As the work of Takemoto Niina, Bill Michalopoulos, and James Warren has shown, the historiography of Japanese migrant sex workers is always charged and difficult to approach, both because of the paucity of sources and because such sources can produce politically contradictory interpretations and become part of contested narratives in the construction of cultural memory. Already in the 19th century, the presence of Karayuki-san abroad became involved in political debates over licensed prostitution and over the international image of Japan. Newspapers and political commentators recognize on one side the pioneering role of these women in the expansion of Japanese trade abroad and to the economic development at home, thanks to their remittances to their families. On the other, Japanese sex workers abroad were seen increasingly and contempt as a national shame, their occupation denigrated as shugyo, dirty activity. It is estimated that tens of thousands of Japanese women were employed as sex workers in Southeast Asia in the early decades of the 20th century, but their number dropped since the early 1920s when Japanese consulates applied a strong prohibition against the practice in collaboration with local colonial officers. While many Karayuki-san stayed abroad to work as maidens, some returned to Japan. The feminist historian Yamazaki Tomoko has told the story of one of these repatriated Karayuki-san in her account, Sandakan Brothel Number 8, published in 1972. The book had a strong impact in Japan, raising the discussion over these Japanese migrant sex workers as the victims of modernization, exploited and then discriminated and forgotten by the nation state, as poignantly represented in a 1974 film directed by Kumai Kei and based on Yamazaki's book and her successive 1977 work, The Grave of Sandakan. The last scene of the film takes place at a Karayuki-san cemetery in Southeast Asia, and this brings us back to the photo of the ritual dedicated to the memory of the dead. Who was the Japanese priest at the center, and how did he get there? The man at the center of the photo is Hirota Gonsho, a Japanese Buddhist priest of the Shingon sect. Gonsho was born in a shopkeeper family in Okayama Prefecture, but at the age of 40 started a wandering religious life after experiencing a miraculous healing following a pilgrimage to Shikoku. He continued with pilgrimages to Shikoku and Kyushu, connected with popular faith in Kukai, the founder of esoteric Shingon Buddhism, attracting a growing number of lay followers who admire the miraculous power connected with both his pilgrimages and purification rituals. Thanks to the support of these lay followers, Hirota established his own temple in Shimabara in 1895, where the photos of the Karayuki-san are still preserved. Photos also help us understand the way Gonsho presented himself. In the photo on the left of this slide, we see Gonsho in the traditional attire of the Japanese Buddhist pilgrim, especially of the Shikoku pilgrimage dedicated to Kukai, which had made his preaching successful, especially in the area of Nagasaki. The photo is framed and hangs in the main hall of the temple, close to another photo on the same slide on the right, which still stresses the importance he attached to pilgrimage, but this time to a much faraway destination, India. In this photo, Gonsho is wearing a robe that resembles those worn by South Asian Buddhist monks, and he gazes at the majestic Himalayas behind him. He holds a stick that is considered to be the same as the begging staff, shakujo, enshrined next to the main altar in the same hall of the temple that is still visible today. In these two photos, Gonsho presents himself as both the itinerant priest of traditional faith in Kukai and as the modern Japanese Buddhist who can reach the birthland of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, India. Another image, in the next slide here, hanging in the main hall, gives us a geographical representation of Gonsho's international pilgrimage. A map of the Gulf of Bengal covering both the Southeast Asian and Indian locations visited by the priest during his travel. In my attempt at taking a photo of the old map framed to memorialize Gonsho's pilgrimage, I struggle with its angled position and with the flecks of the light, as you can see in this photo. But this photo can give us a hint of the use of the map in a ritual space, such as the main hall of the temple, which you can actually see reflected on the glass covering the map. Hanging high on the wall, this map is not meant to give a detailed travel information, but to stress the exceptionality of Gonsho's pilgrimage to India. While India, the birthplace of Buddhism, has been at the center of Japanese worldviews and historical narratives of spread of Buddhism through Asia for centuries, it is only in the Meiji period that Japanese Buddhists can have the experience of a direct travel to India. As scholars such as Richard Jaffe has shown, visiting the sacred sites in India, studying Buddhist texts in Indic languages such as Sanskrit, and establishing collaborations with intellectuals and religious reformers in South Asia has been an essential part in the construction of ideas of modern Buddhism in Japan. Recovering direct ties with the Indian sources of Buddhism allowed Japanese Buddhists to go beyond their sectarian affiliations and to tie their own Japanese Buddhist textual and cultural traditions to the idea of Buddhism as a world religion in a modern sense. Gonsho was one of the Japanese Buddhists that took advantage of modern trade networks and infrastructures to make a pilgrimage to India. What was very peculiar about his pilgrimage is that it did not come from the elite context of the Buddhist sectarian headquarters in either Tokyo or Kyoto. He was not a literate monk and did not speak any foreign language, he only spoke Japanese. So, how did he manage to accomplish a journey that at that time was still quite dangerous and only for a few people? Here, the Karayuki san surrounding him in this photo come back at the center of the scene. As historian Kurahashi Masanao has reconstructed from Gonsho's travel notes, the priest traveled from Japan to India from 1906 to 1909, making a series of stops in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Southeast Asia. It is during these stops that he met communities of Karayuki-san that resided there. Most of these women came from the same Shimabara area where Gonsho had established his temple and his followers. It is the presence of this transnational network of Japanese migrants connecting to Shimabara places as far away as Siberia or Borneo that facilitated Gonsho's pilgrimage to India, providing him accommodation, linguistic help, and also material support through the monetary donations that the migrants gave in exchange for performing memorialization rituals. The rare collection of photos of Karayuki-san preserved at Gonsho's temple in Shimabara were mostly taken at the end of these memorialization rituals and mostly at cemeteries whose construction is often indebted to the efforts of some of the earliest and most numerous communities of Japanese migrants, the Karayuki-san. Gonsho's travel notes are scant, but they always record the performance of memorialization rituals for Japanese migrant communities and the amount of money he received as a donation from these communities. In the next photo, we see another group of Japanese migrants, not only women, surrounding Gonsho and the scroll used for the memorialization ritual. This time the location is identified with the Japanese cemetery of Singapore, and the inscription specifies that the photo was taken on occasion of a ritual called Segaki, or feeding hungry ghosts. This ritual was especially dedicated to the spirits of those dead who had lost family connections, in this way risking to be forgotten. This was particularly the case of Japanese migrant laborers, even more so when the kind of labor they did was designated and denigrated as a shame for the nation, such as in the case of sex labor. Also in this photo, the women take a pious attitude, joining their hands in prayer. Did they choose to be represented in this religious posture, or were they instructed so by the priest or by the photographer, on whom we had no information? As with the historiography of the Karayuki-san, the interpretation of these photos is also complicated by the lack of information and can be interpreted in very contrasting ways. I will propose one interpretation using the following photo. This photo is another Segaki ritual for the dead at Penang in the Malay Peninsula, and repeats part of the characteristic postures of the commemorative pictures taken by Gonsho after his meeting with the Karayuki-san, such as the women kneeling and joining their hands, and the priest standing by the Segaki scroll, in this case next to a gravestone likely dedicated to the Muen Botoke, dead without relatives. This time, it is the women that occupy the center of the scene, being represented as pious Buddhists who remember their dead and support through donations the memorialization ritual, the construction of local cemeteries for Japanese migrants abroad, and the priest's pilgrimage to India. As Yamazaki Tomoko and others have argued, photos played an essential role as a tool of communication between Karayuki-san and their families and communities back in Japan, because many of them did not have the level of literacy to write letters. Photos also gave a visual representation of their lives abroad, showing themselves in kimonos and traditional hairstyles could signal the persistence of their link and their identity as Japanese, in opposition to the photos of North American Ameyuki-san in Western-style clothes, analyzed in another module of this same website. The photos taken at the end of the Segaki ritual could also show to the observer the Buddhist identity of the Karayuki-san and their attention for Buddhist devotional practices embodied in their worshipping posture. The image constructed in this way might have corrected the moral criticism often associated with sex work, especially by Christian associations in Japan and abroad. The ritual and its commemoration through the medium of photography gave the migrant women the chance to represent themselves as the center of a pious activity. We can compare the central stage occupied by the Karayuki-san in this picture to the marginal position of the women in another ritual described by historian David Ambaras in his work. Ambaras analyzes a ceremony held for the celebration of the emperor's birthday among Japanese migrants in Vietnam, described in the 1920s journalistic reportage by journalist Ando Sakam. Women, considered polluted, did not have direct access to the room where men gave offerings and remained at the margins of the ceremony. On the contrary, in the photos taken by Gonsho, the Karayuki-san occupy a central position in the Segaki ritual, some of them bowing, others also staring in the camera. The women likely knew that the photos would be shown by the priest once he was back at his temple in Shimabara, and in this way, in addition to use the monetary product of their sex labors to fund memorialization rituals for those who died far away from Japan, they could indirectly use the medium of commemoration photos to inform the way they themselves would be represented in Japan. This is one interpretation of the photos of the Karayuki-san that is aimed at restoring agency to them through the use of embodiment of religious attitudes as a tool to inform their image in Japan. Other opposite interpretations can also be suggested, which instead question the role of the priest or of the photographer in staging the worshipping attitude of these women, or also on the commodification of the image of the women that would be shown to strangers visiting the temple in Shimabara. Historians have pointed out that in the Meiji period, sex workers, both in Japan and in migrant contexts, accepted to be portrayed in photos that would be sold as postcards as a way to increase their income and their popularity. In the case of Gonsho's a photo of the Karayuki-san, however, those that were turned into postcards mostly represented the memorial pagoda built after his return from his pilgrimage to India to enshrine a statue of Shakyamuni he had received from fellow Buddhist monks in Myanmar, as in the two postcards shown in this slide. The pagoda in the postcard is still standing today and enshrines the Shakyamuni statue. While the pagoda was meant to commemorate the pilgrimage to India made by Gonsho, its construction was made possible thanks to the donations of the Karayuki-san. The name of all the donors, the amount donated, and the place they lived, often locations in Southeast Asia, are recorded on the tamagaki, the stone pillars that surround the memorial pagoda, as we can see in these two photos. The materiality of the stone railing on which their names and locations are recorded form a sort of tri-dimensional map, which adds to the one of the pilgrimage hanging inside the main hall of the temple, which I showed in the previous slide. Through their often denigrated sex labor, the migrant women not only created a network that facilitated Gonsho's pilgrimage to India, but also financed the material construction of its commemoration through the pagoda. In this way, these women's experience of migration, labor, and exploration and exploitation within the sex trafficking in Southeast Asia made it possible to build the sacred space of the Buddhist memorial. This memorial expresses both pilgrimage and migration as constituting modern Buddhism. On the other hand, Gonsho's pilgrimage to India provided the Karayuki-san with the chance to produce visual, photos, and material the stone railing, records to be remembered in Japan. The shape itself of the pagoda, built to resemble a lighthouse, can be interpreted as symbolically indicating the route home to the many women scattered around the harbors from Hong Kong to Mumbai. Buddhist pilgrimage and Buddhist memorialization of the dead provided the Karayuki-san with a venue to shape their image in Japan. In conclusion of this lecture, I wanted to add a consideration on the role of the historian in this process that entangles historiography, cultural memory, and religious memorialization. I could access the photo of the Shimabara temple through the copies kept at the temple that the caretaker in charge of it consented to show me and to let me show for educational and research purposes. As a setting for sharing the photos and the story behind them, the main hall of the temple is turned into a space to memorialize not only Gonsho's pilgrimage to India, but also the experience of migration of these women. While doing research on this site, I was compelled to ask myself in which way scholarship and historiography are involved in the process of memorialization. Local historians and educators have played an essential role in leading a fundraising campaign for the restoration of the Memorial Pagoda in 2014, as you can see in these photos from the local newspaper Nagasaki Shimbun. Before that, the pagoda was in a state of disrepair and risked collapse. Also because of the economic situation of the temple, which does not have a cemetery, and in this way cannot count on the steady income of the community's offerings for grave care. As in the case of the final scene of Kumai's previously mentioned film that I've mentioned previously, where the historian and main character takes care of abandoned graves of Karayuki-san she had found in Borneo after interviewing an elderly Karayuki-san in Japan. Also in Shimabara, historians play a central role in the commemoration of Karayuki-san. In this way, local historians and educators, but also myself as a historian, the audience of this lecture, and the pedagogical tool offered by this website become agents in the complex process of research, historiographical narrativization, and memorialization. Given the sensitivity of the topic, migration of women in sexual labor, these processes can become complicated. I would like to end this lecture with a question for further discussion. As researchers, educators, historians, what are some points that we should keep in mind in accessing, preserving, and disseminating the photos of Karayuki-san and other historical records? Thank you for your attention.